So when you look at today's kid, instead of maybe looking down our nose at him, maybe we actually need to begin to applaud him or them for some of the things that they've been able to accomplish. Let's take a look at the black youth culture. And I would say hip-hop culture for the sake of generalizing it, but actually, when you're thinking about hip-hop culture, you're thinking about kids that were born from 1964 to 85. And believe it or not, the front of the hip-hop culture, the kids that were born closest to 1965, 64, 66, are different than the back of the hip-hop culture. Anybody know what are some of the differences? What are some of the differences that come to mind when you're thinking about kids that were born in the front of the hip-hop culture as kids that were born in the late 80s in the hip-hop culture? Well, one that should come to mind, again, is our traditional set of morals, values, norms that were part of our upbringing. Whereas in 1985, they had begun to reshape themselves. So I look at hip-hop as probably the greatest single achievement of this generation. They found a way to identify themselves, communicate with one another, and also to deliver on some of the promises that America hasn't delivered to them. Because you have to remember, America's a first-class country. Always has been, always will be. The trick in America is to become a first-class citizen with all the services that come with first-class citizenship. So as our youth struggle trying to get to that class, they found a vehicle, literally, that will get them there. Now, what galvanized them, and we clearly saw them as a unit and a culture, is the death of Tupac in 1996, as evidenced by all the accolades around the world regarding his particular death. And then the death of Biggie in March. Chris Wallace in 1997. They paid homage to them all around the world. And for the first time, we, as a society, began to realize that they had a culture that was alive and well and speaking to us. And they grew and it grew from there. And it became a little more sophisticated as it moved along. Black youth culture, as we say, is really nothing new. But the difference between the black youth culture in 1920s and 1930s was the values and the norms. What dictated most of our values and norms for the black youth culture up to 1965? Our traditional institutions. What were they? Family. Family was one. Well, we know for a fact, literally, that the nuclear family has disintegrated. Not because it wanted to, simply because of the dynamics right now involved in making a living, because in most households, parents do what? Both parents work, am I right? Yeah. But when you and I were coming up, mom was usually in the household and dad was doing what? Right. Dad was working. Kids had a tendency to spend more time as a family unit with their families than they do nowadays. As evidence, 30 years ago, the average kid spent 5 hours with his family. In the new millennium, the average kid, if he makes 15 minutes, I'll take my hat off to it. In fact, I've got a 19-year-old daughter. Trying to get all of us in one place at one time is a difficult task. Make no mistake about it. Let's alone try to invent some quality time contained within that 15 minutes, because basically during the 15 minutes, you spend most of the time arguing with one another. Am I right? Disagreements about this, disagreements about that. So there's very little quality time that is actually put into it. What else dictated the values back in the 20s, the 30s, the 40s? Well, believe it or not, school. School was one of the institutions that dictated. It was a certain set of values and standards that went with your education that most of us had to adhere to back in those days. Well, let's take a look at our educational system as it stands right now in this country. Most of our urban schools are what? Falling apart, substandard education, am I right? In fact, right now, they are putting teachers on point all across this country. Even thinking about testing teachers now to see if they are able to teach, am I right? Well, what do you think that does for the quality of life in those school settings? Most urban schools, the school books are completely outdated. Yeah. The information, believe it or not, is not up to snuff regarding what's going on in today's world. So what happens is the kids that come from that urban setting, actually by the time they get through school, they are unprepared educationally to function in this world on a regular basis. What else? The church. Back in the 20s, the 30s, the 40s, the churches dictated part of our values, part of our standards, part of our norms for us. And what happens is that was actually done on a national level. Now, it had some variations community-wise, south and the north, east and the west, but basically that's the way it was passed from one generation to the next. That's the way we moved along the millennium of cultural evolution. When we look at what dictates the values and the norms now, we can clearly see how things started to become so very confused. Now the media, pop music, films, entertainment, and fashion. Let's take a look at the media piece for just a second. Our kids are bombarded on a daily basis with all kind of global images, am I right? What are some of those global images that they see? What are some of the global images that they see? Just think about them in your head for a few minutes. You take those global images and put them together with the pop music. And that's not to say that all pop music or rap music is bad, but the lyrics do have an impact on a kid's life and the way he views the world. See, as we were coming up, we had our worldview shaped by black pride, civil rights, am I right? Our family, our traditional institutions. Well, our kids have their worldview, but what shaped their worldview is completely different from what shaped our worldview. You have to take a look at the media and how it shapes their worldview. Youth business is big business. Corporate America is clearly in tune to that. Look at the quality and flavor of commercials like Coca-Cola, Pepsi right now, Burger King, McDonald's. They've all taken on what kind of flavor to them? The hip-hop culture. Do you realize that? Yeah, the hip-hop culture. Why? Because corporate America had realized years ago that was a viable way to generate revenue. A viable way to generate revenue. And they are exploiting that and using that to no end. Our films. You can think back to Boys in the Hood. What do our films tell our kids as they watch them day in and day out? They make decisions over their life based on film, based on the media. Whereas opposed to 30 years ago, we made decisions based on family, church, school. Today's kid doesn't base his decisions on that. The media and what you see in both films, entertainment, and fashion dictate and influences their values, their norms, and literally kind of determines the ebb and flow of their lives. Entertainment. Entertainment, look at MTV, how it's grown to be a force in itself. In fact, the President of the United States even chose to promote himself on MTV, am I right? In institutions across this country, they have a great deal of difficulty at institutions that have TV sets in them simply because one group wants to watch MTV, the other group wants to watch BET, and guess what? They have all kind of confusion in our penal institutions in this country behind those two different entities. One wants to watch BET, the other wants to watch MTV, and they have trouble all the time at our institutions because it's a power struggle going on as to what station that television is going to be on. Fashion. We have truly commercialized ourselves in this country. Yeah, we have truly commercialized ourselves. Hip-hop fashion is big fashion now. In fact, most of our kids, that's how they can, believe it or not, get immediately into the culture. Whether they're black, white. Have you noticed that if you line 2,000 kids up now, no matter what color they are, where they came from, what nationality they are, if all of them had their back to you, you couldn't tell one from the other. Am I right?
That's right.
Because literally they are all wearing the same clothes, talking the same talk, walking the same walk. Fashion plays a big part of their life. And they show it to you with the pants and the hats turned backwards and all that you see. Again, we have a tendency to demonize it, but did you think about us when we were growing up? How many guys in here wore the jacked up pants? Anybody in here wear the jacked up pants? Saw the Temptations on Ed Sullivan, and everybody put their pants up there, am I right? Right. Because, believe it or not, each culture, each generation's culture tries to embrace their own identity. And what this kid's culture right now is trying to do is embrace their own identity. And everything from the cornrows in their head to the tattoos and stuff that you see on them is all about what they are about.